The loud crash from the apartment next door echoed through the hallway just after sunset. At first, I thought someone had dropped a heavy piece of furniture, but seconds later came another sound, soft crying that stopped me in my tracks. I hesitated with my hand on my own door, wondering whether I should mind my own business or knock. Something inside me refused to walk away. I had no idea that opening that door would lead me into the most emotional chapter of my life, one that would forever change the way I looked at kindness, loneliness, and the quiet strength hidden inside broken people. Before we continue, if you believe that one act of kindness can completely change someone's life, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to Kindness Studio. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories filled with hope and second chances. My name is Daniel, and I had lived in the same apartment building for nearly 4 years. Life had become painfully predictable after my fiancée left me only months before our wedding. Since then, I spent my evenings working overtime as a carpenter, returning home exhausted to a silent apartment that felt emptier every passing day. I smiled at neighbors, exchanged polite greetings, and kept to myself. It seemed easier that way. The woman who lived next door had moved in only a few weeks earlier. Her name was Grace. She appeared to be in her early 30s, always polite but distant, carrying grocery bags alone and rarely speaking to anyone for more than a few moments. She had kind eyes that somehow looked permanently tired, as if sleep could never erase whatever burden she carried. When I knocked on her door that evening, she answered after several seconds. She looked embarrassed more than frightened. Behind her, the bedroom looked unusually messy. The wooden bed frame had collapsed completely, leaving the mattress tilted awkwardly toward the floor. She apologized repeatedly for the noise and quietly admitted that she had no idea how to repair it. Since she knew I worked with wood, she wondered if I could help. The repair itself wasn't difficult. Years of building furniture had taught me exactly where weak joints usually failed. One side rail had cracked clean through, and several screws had loosened over time. I gathered my toolbox from my apartment and spent nearly an hour reinforcing the frame with stronger brackets and fresh hardwood supports. Throughout the repair, Grace barely spoke. She thanked me several times but remained unusually quiet. Something about the silence felt heavier than awkwardness. It felt like someone carrying an invisible weight they had become too accustomed to mentioning. When I finally tightened the last bolt, I carefully checked every corner of the frame. It no longer creaked or shifted under pressure. To prove the repair was solid, I gently pressed down on each side of the mattress until everything remained perfectly steady. Grace smiled for what seemed like the first genuine time since I had met her. It wasn't a dramatic smile. It was small, almost hesitant, but it completely changed her face. She quietly suggested that I sit for a moment and make sure everything truly held. I laughed at the practical request and carefully sat on the edge of the bed before standing again. The frame stayed perfectly stable. What started as a simple test somehow became the beginning of an unexpected conversation. She offered me coffee, and for the first time we actually talked. As the evening grew darker outside, Grace slowly began sharing pieces of her life. She had recently escaped a difficult marriage filled not with violence but with constant emotional manipulation. Every decision she made had been criticized. Every dream she pursued had been dismissed until she eventually stopped believing in herself altogether. Leaving had taken years of courage, yet starting over alone felt almost as terrifying. Listening to her reminded me how differently people carry pain. Some wounds leave visible scars. Others hide behind ordinary smiles and quiet routines. Eventually I shared my own story. I told her about Emily, the woman I had loved for 6 years. Just weeks before our wedding, she admitted she had fallen in love with someone else. She left without anger or betrayal, simply explaining that her heart had changed. There were no villains in my story, only heartbreak that neither of us knew how to fix. For months afterward I buried myself in work because building furniture seemed easier than rebuilding my own life. Grace listened without interrupting. Somehow it felt strangely comforting to speak honestly to someone who understood disappointment without trying to solve it. Over the next several weeks our accidental friendship quietly grew. Some evenings we shared coffee on the apartment balcony while watching the city lights appear one by one. Other nights we exchanged homemade dinners whenever one of us cooked too much. There was no pressure to impress each other, no expectations, only two neighbors discovering that loneliness becomes lighter when someone simply listens. Then one rainy afternoon everything changed again. I returned home to find Grace sitting alone outside the building entrance, soaked despite the covered walkway. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She held a letter in trembling hands. Her younger brother, Michael, had been seriously injured in a highway accident several states away. Although doctors believed he would recover, he needed surgery immediately. Grace wanted desperately to be there but had almost nothing left in her savings after rebuilding her life. Without thinking twice, I offered to drive her through the night. The journey lasted nearly 9 hours. Rain covered the highways almost the entire distance. We spoke very little. Sometimes silence carries more comfort than words ever could. When we finally arrived, Michael survived the operation. The doctors believed the next few weeks would be difficult but hopeful. Grace hugged me tightly in the hospital hallway. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was the kind of hug someone gives when they finally realize they are no longer facing the world completely alone. During those long hospital days I met her family. Her elderly mother thanked me with tears in her eyes. Michael joked with me despite his injuries, insisting I had already become part of the family because nobody willingly drives 9 hours unless they truly care. Their kindness reminded me how long it had been since I felt connected to people beyond casual conversations. Months passed. Michael recovered. Grace slowly rebuilt her confidence. She found a better job working with children at a community learning center. Every afternoon she came home carrying colorful drawings that students insisted she keep. Little by little, the sadness behind her eyes began disappearing. Watching her heal somehow encouraged me to heal too. I accepted projects I had previously turned down. I reopened the small woodworking business I had abandoned after my breakup. Instead of merely surviving each week, I finally began planning for the future again. One Saturday morning Grace surprised me with a handwritten envelope. Inside was a simple photograph. It showed the repaired bed frame exactly as it had looked months earlier. On the back she had written that the broken bed was never really the important part. The important moment was realizing someone had knocked on her door without expecting anything in return. That simple act reminded her that not everyone enters another person's life to hurt them. I kept that photograph inside my workshop from that day forward. Whenever difficult projects frustrated me or old memories returned, I looked at that picture and remembered that kindness often begins with something unbelievably ordinary. A repaired chair. A shared meal. A late-night drive. Or simply choosing to knock instead of walking away. Years later Grace and I still laugh about the evening her bed frame collapsed. Neither of us could have imagined that such an ordinary repair would become the foundation for a friendship built on trust, compassion, and second chances. Life rarely changes because of dramatic moments. More often, it changes because someone quietly chooses to care when nobody else notices. If this story has touched your heart so far, please support Kindness Studio by liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribing for more emotional stories inspired by everyday acts of kindness. Before this story ends, tell us in the comments, what is one small act of kindness that changed your life forever? We'd truly love to read your story. As I locked my workshop one peaceful evening, I realized that I had spent years believing broken things were meant to be replaced. Yet life kept teaching me something entirely different. Furniture can be repaired. Hearts can heal. Trust can return. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to knock on a door, pick up a toolbox, and remind another human being that they are never as alone as they think. And in helping someone else rebuild what had fallen apart, I quietly rebuilt my own life too.